Peak human.
Les humains à leur meilleur.
C'est tu apogeo.
ピーク人間
All right, we've got Amy Berger here to tell us about your noggin and how to keep it working well. She's got a master's in human nutrition. She's a certified nutrition specialist and a nutritional therapy practitioner and an expert on Alzheimer's disease. What's great about her is she's taken all the info from the cutting-edge research being done in brain chemistry, metabolic disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, and a ton more, and done all the dirty work to figure it out and package it up so anyone can understand it. It may get detailed at times, but just listen on. I let her do the talking, so sit back and be ready to soak up some info. I'm not going to mention the Food Lies film crowdfunding on Indiegogo this time, so let's just hear from Amy. Well, thank you, Amy, for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here.
Okay, great. Well, I have your book here. It's pretty substantial. And I've checked out your lectures and your site and really happy to talk to you. And today we're going to be talking about Alzheimer's, which is really scary to a lot of people because it just seems to hit anyone. But you believe we have a lot of control on if we get the disease or not. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of control over our cognitive destiny, so to speak, and our brain health. You sort of said the magic word. Alzheimer's kind of strikes everybody. It seems to strike indiscriminately, except for the fact that it sort of exclusively strikes older people, except we are no longer talking about very, very elderly people. Like back in the day, Alzheimer's was this thing that really struck people's grandparents and, people's spouses when they were in their 80s and 90s. But there's people in their 50s and 60s now being diagnosed either with Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment, which is the precursor to Alzheimer's. And so we're not really talking about older people anymore. But except for the age factor, I say that Alzheimer's is an equal opportunity killer. It doesn't matter what race you are, what religion, color, creed. Alzheimer's doesn't care how much money you have in the bank, and anyone and everyone is susceptible to this illness. And it just is not quite as mysterious as we have been led to think it is. There are a lot of unanswered questions, for sure, and a great deal of research remains to be done. But that doesn't mean that we don't know anything about this. And I don't think it's controversial at all to say that we know what the problem is in Alzheimer's. We know what's going wrong in the brain. The issue is we don't know why. So what is going wrong is that they actually call Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain. And where that comes from is this illness is basically an energy crisis in the brain. It's a fuel shortage in the brain. And when you think about what happens when you get tired, you get sloppy, you get clumsy, you make mistakes you don't normally make. So think of what happens when your brain gets tired, when your brain doesn't have enough fuel and enough energy. And, if anyone out there listening isn't aware, your brain uses anywhere from 20 to 25% of all the energy, all the fuel, all the glucose, all the oxygen in your entire body. Even when you're sleeping, even when you are watching TV and you think you're practically brain dead, you think your brain is leaking out of your ear, your brain requires a huge amount of energy all the time. And so anything that interrupts that fuel supply is going to have major catastrophic effect for your brain function and for your ability to think and remember and behave properly. And the major problem going wrong in the Alzheimer's brain is that there's not enough fuel. And mostly it's a problem with glucose, which, not to get too technical, but glucose is the main fuel for the brain under most normal conditions. People eating a normal type diet, living their life, glucose is the main fuel for the brain. So when the brain, for whatever reason, becomes unable to use enough glucose, it basically starts to hibernate, to go into power save mode, to turn certain vital functions off. And this, the end result of that is memory loss, cognitive impairment, personality changes. So I don't know how deep in the weeds you want me to get, but that's the overview.
That's a great overview. So it's not controversial what goes on, like what is going on in the brain with Alzheimer's. So that's the problem with the inability to use that glucose. So what causes that inability to use glucose?
That's a good question. And I don't think we know the answer. There's a lot of speculation. I don't think it's been identified for sure yet what the cause is. I think what's at least contributing is a lot of the food that we eat now and how we live, that we don't get enough sleep, we don't get enough fresh air, we're too sedentary. But I think that a poor diet is probably more important than, and all of those other things contribute in some way. But I think the diet is the fundamental piece. And, it's really interesting because when you think about things like obesity or type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease, everybody at this point kind of takes it for granted that diet and lifestyle play a role in those illnesses, if not the primary driving role. Nobody even questions that anymore. No one says, diet has nothing to do with heart disease. Diet has nothing to do with type 2 diabetes. Of course it does. We don't even ask that anymore. And yet when it comes to Alzheimer's disease, we just pretend like we're totally clueless, like we have no idea where this is coming from, as if Alzheimer's disease couldn't possibly be a diet and lifestyle illness in the same way that all of those other conditions are. All of those same conditions, like I said, type 2 diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, even PCOS, infertility, all of these things that have exploded in incidence over the last 50 to 60 years. So has Alzheimer's. And so it's not unreasonable to suspect that the same things that are contributing to those other illnesses are contributing to Alzheimer's. The brain is not independent of the rest of the body. What's bad for the body is bad for the brain. If poor food and poor sleep and not moving around enough and being stressed out is bad for the body, it's also bad for the brain.
Yeah, I'm flabbergasted that people aren't talking about this more. I had no idea that this was the case until, I started researching for this film, and it makes total sense now. And it's all about insulin, and that's all about, not chronically eating carbohydrates or sugar and raising your insulin levels. And the same thing works for the brain. So I may be simplifying it too much, but how exactly does it work in the brain?
Yeah, it's they're actually still discovering some of the mechanisms of glucose and insulin in the brain. But in addition to the phrases type 3 diabetes and diabetes of the brain, they also call Alzheimer's brain insulin resistance. And part of that comes from much of the brain's ability to take up and use glucose is not dependent on insulin. Like, everybody thinks of insulin as a blood sugar hormone, right? And insulin does play an important role in blood sugar regulation, but it does a whole lot more than that in the body and in the brain. It's not just a blood sugar hormone. In the brain, it seems to play a role in enabling healthy cognitive function. And I don't think they've really determined, or identified all the precise mechanisms, but they know insulin does get into the brain. It plays a role in the brain, and it actually influences through other hormones in the brain. It actually influences the physical structure of neurons, the cells, primarily responsible for memory and thinking and all that. Those cells have to have the right shape in order to function properly. And, the right amount of insulin at the right time in the right places helps keep those structures the way they need to be. The interesting thing about insulin resistance, or really what I prefer to call it chronically high insulin, or what we call hyperinsulinemia, which just means your insulin is too high, too much. That is an independent risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So, everybody thinks Alzheimer's is all about genetics or family history, and there is a genetic component to it, and you are more susceptible if it runs in your family. But regardless of your genetics and regardless of your family history, if you have chronically elevated insulin, you are at greater risk for Alzheimer's, period. So it's independent of anything else. It's bad for the brain.
Yeah. I mean, that's great to know, because that means we have control over it. And, I think a lot of people have heard of the gene or allele APOE4, and that if you have it, you're at a greater risk for Alzheimer's. So I guess just talk a little bit about that. and how it relates?
Yeah, this ApoE4 gene is fascinating because it increases risk for Alzheimer's for sure. We get two copies of every gene, right? One from our father, one from our mother. People that have one copy of this ApoE4 gene are at increased risk for Alzheimer's, and people with two copies are at like super exponentially increased risk, almost like 50 to 90% risk of developing Alzheimer's. However, not everybody with Alzheimer's has even one ApoE4 gene, let alone two. And on the other side, plenty of people with two copies of E4 do not develop Alzheimer's. So by itself, this gene is not enough to cause this disease. E4 does not cause Alzheimer's. So if anyone out there listening has been tested and you know you're E4, this is not a death sentence. The really fascinating thing about E4 is that this particular variation of this ApoE gene is believed to have appeared earlier in human evolution than the other types. This variation of the gene was basically forged in our hunter-gatherer days. And this gene was selected against in human populations with a longer history of grain-based agriculture. Grain meaning corn, wheat, rice, starchy or carbohydrate plants. So what this means in plain English is that people who carry this gene today, this hunter-gatherer gene, are the least suited for the modern diet that is so high in total carbohydrate, but especially in the refined, the flours, the sugars. They're literally just not genetically equipped to deal with it. So it's not that E4 is a bad gene or a dangerous, harmful gene. It's that it's a really, really bad mismatch for the way that we eat today.
Yes, I agree. I mean, a lot of the problems could be attributed. Daniel Lieberman calls them the mismatch diseases, right? Or you could call the diseases of civilization, or everything that we eat today is, not everything, but there's a huge mismatch in how we are supposed to be eating.
Yeah, I mean, I just have a hard time believing that anyone is genetically programmed to get Alzheimer's disease or any other illness for that matter. I'm not denying that E4 does increase susceptibility. The question is why? And the answer seems to be that it's just a really, really bad match for a very high carb diet. And it may not just be the carbs. It may also be, the high amount of omega-6 rich vegetable oils that we eat now. So it's multifactorial. It's not just one thing, but there's many different dietary things contributing. And the fact is, you can absolutely get Alzheimer's if you don't carry the E4 gene, because again, the modern diet is pretty bad for everybody. It's just especially bad. It's the worst for the E4s.
And do you know, is there something that connects that ApoE4 gene directly to what goes on with glucose in the brain, or are these kind of separate things?
Oh, that's a good question. I think they're connected, but it may not be as connected to glucose in the brain as it is to cholesterol and fats. Because people with the E4 gene have a very high risk for like cardiovascular disease and stroke and atherosclerosis and all that. Except again, I think that is due to the mismatch with the diet. It's not necessarily because that gene, if you have E4, it automatically clogs your arteries. I mean, nothing really works that way. I do think the E4, it's hard to explain what it does, but it alters lipid processing in the brain, like the way that the brain gets and uses fats and cholesterol. And if people out there listening are sort of new to nutrition news, or you haven't really heard the latest, cholesterol and fat, including saturated fat, really, really aren't the demons that we've been led to believe they are for so many years. Your brain is actually built largely out of cholesterol. Every single neuron, every single cell, cholesterol is a huge, huge part of that, and so are fats. And if E4 affects the way that the brain is able to receive and use different fats and cholesterol, then that is definitely going to have an impact on cognitive function. So I think it may also play a role in the glucose metabolism, but it probably has more to do with the fats.
Great. Yeah, we'll get back to cholesterol and diet later. You kind of touched on a little earlier about even calling it type 3 diabetes and the insulin resistance of the brain. Now, I haven't heard that until a few months ago. So I don't think it is totally mainstream. So what do mainstream doctors think about Alzheimer's, and why isn't this more accepted as the stuff that you're telling us?
Oh, I honestly have no idea. I don't know why it's not more accepted. I mean, The reason that I wrote my book is because I actually started researching this Alzheimer's insulin glucose connection in graduate school. And after I came upon this sort of treasure trove of information, because this is all over the scientific literature. I mean, you have to intentionally ignore it to miss it. The medical journals are just loaded with papers on this. And I couldn't keep it to myself. I thought that this was truly potentially life-saving and life-changing information. And I'm a nutritionist. Why? I shouldn't have had to write this book. Some neurologist should have written this book 10 years ago. Some physician, some geriatric specialist should have beat me to this. But because nobody had, and I felt like I had to get this information to the loved ones and caregivers of people with this illness. Like I couldn't sit on it. And why isn't it more mainstream? I don't know. I think part of it is it just takes time for a lot of this information to trickle down from the medical journals into the average, family doctor's office. But we're at that point. Some of these papers go back 2 or 3 decades. This isn't new. I mean, if I can stress anything, none of this is new. This type 3 diabetes, the failure of the brain to properly fuel itself with glucose has been known for many, many years. I don't know why it's not coming out.
It hurts me to know that this is not out there.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, I don't want to mislead anyone listening. There are a lot of unanswered questions. We don't know everything, but we're not clueless. Just because we don't know everything doesn't mean we don't know something. It doesn't mean we don't know everything, but we know enough to start taking action.
Yes. We'll get into the action later too, but there's no real harm in the action that you can take. I mean, basically you're talking about just having a healthier lifestyle and, some dietary changes. So it's not some insane, prescription. So, where are we with drug treatment? It seems like there is no real medications, and the mainstream science is only looking at it from one angle. And that's maybe what's preventing them from looking at approach that you're talking about, a more dietary approach. And they're only looking at the genetic and sort of medication type approach.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So the answer to your question as to where we are with effective medication is nowhere. We are absolutely nowhere. There are a couple of drugs on the market in the US approved for Alzheimer's. They do almost nothing to reverse or, not even slow down the progression, not even slow down the worsening of this. It's really palliative. It's like, oh, well, we literally have nothing to offer you, so here, take this pill. You might as well take M&Ms. I mean, I hate to say that, but that's the truth. There's really no effective pharmaceutical drug for this condition. And I think you're right. I mean, part of that is because they're treating symptoms instead of the root cause. Nobody's saying, why is the brain struggling for energy and what can we do about that? They're looking at, like in so many other illnesses, they are looking at things that are associated with the illness, but may not be causal factors. And just to explain that really briefly, it's a very similar story with cholesterol and statin drugs. So some people who have high cholesterol have heart attacks, have cardiovascular disease, but plenty of people with low cholesterol or normal cholesterol also suffer heart attacks or have cardiovascular disease. The high cholesterol does not cause heart disease. So to lower cholesterol with drugs doesn't prevent heart disease. It doesn't reverse heart disease, because cholesterol is more like this sort of distraction sideline number that just because you can measure it, they want to reduce it, so they're treating the cholesterol instead of treating the actual damage in the heart and in the blood vessels. And it's sort of very similar with Alzheimer's. They're constantly looking at what's called amyloid plaques. It's very similar with, I'm sort of getting too detailed, but
no, that's fine.
Amyloid
that's fine. I was going to say, let's talk about amyloid plaques actually.
Yeah, the amyloid plaques, if people have done any research or done any reading on Alzheimer's, you've no doubt come across the term amyloid plaque or amyloid protein. And for a long time, even now, many doctors and many researchers think that this amyloid causes Alzheimer's. And there's a lot of reasons why they think that. But like I just said, for many years, they thought cholesterol caused heart attacks. Very slowly, a little too slowly, in my opinion, we're starting to see the cracks in that cholesterol foundation, and more doctors, even in the mainstream, are starting to understand that cholesterol and saturated fat are not the enemies. And it's the same story with amyloid. It's kind of like this distracting thing. The amyloid proteins are actually protective. They are protective in the face of neuronal injury. They're like a reparative type thing. But because people who have Alzheimer's disease tend to have a lot of this amyloid building up in their brain, they automatically assumed, oh, the amyloid must be causing Alzheimer's, instead of thinking, wow, maybe all that amyloid is building up because the brain is damaged. Whatever's causing Alzheimer's is causing amyloid to be produced in order to help protect the brain. And so there have been a couple of drugs, I think 3 or 4 by now maybe, that have been developed to reduce the formation of these plaques. And these drugs have been a total failure, except here's the kicker. They've been successful in that they do reduce the formation of these proteins and plaques. However, reducing these proteins and plaques has never done anything to slow down or reverse the damage in Alzheimer's. If anything, it makes it worse. There was one drug where the clinical trial had to be stopped early because the people taking the drug were doing so much worse than the people on the placebo. So this amyloid is either not a cause of Alzheimer's or it's not the primary cause, because when you get rid of it, people actually get worse. And they've seen this over and over again. And not only that, similar to the ApoE4 thing, not everybody who has Alzheimer's disease has a whole bunch of amyloid protein in their brain. And there's people who die from other causes, and upon autopsy, when they have their brain examined, they do have a lot of plaque deposition. So again, it's this sort of like thing that's in the brain. In some people it's high, and some people it's low, just like the cholesterol. It doesn't cause disease.
Yes, that is great. Also, with amyloid proteins, so you say that they're protective. So the way I understand it is problem occurs when they're not cleared away. I think that's what you were talking about in your lecture. And the problem is the glucose, and it's protecting itself with these proteins. Is that what's going on?
Yes. Wow, you've done your homework. I'm impressed. There's 2 aspects to that. So the first is what you said about them being cleared. Initially, the amyloid is protective and it's a helpful thing. But if the amyloid itself gets out of control, then the amyloid does become a problem. And that's sort of what we see in Alzheimer's. These proteins are secreted as a defensive step, as a protective, healthy thing. They only become a problem when they build up and accumulate and they're not cleared away. When they build up, they form into these infamous plaques. And oddly enough, the thing that's responsible for clearing them away is something called insulin-degrading enzyme. And that is exactly what it sounds like it is. It's the same enzyme that gets rid of insulin from the bloodstream. So when you have somebody who, like we said earlier, has chronically high insulin, this enzyme is going to be too busy dealing with all the insulin to go after the plaques. So while this enzyme is totally occupied clearing away all the insulin all the time, these amyloid proteins are left to build up and form plaques in the brain. And again, this also not news. This has been known, 15 years, 20 years. These papers go back a long time. So the other reason these amyloid proteins are sort of an issue is that they actually interfere with the brain's ability to use glucose. And we've been saying all along that Alzheimer's is an energy crisis. It's a fuel shortage in the brain because the brain has become unable to properly fuel itself from glucose. So if these amyloid proteins are interfering with glucose usage in the brain, then it makes total sense. Like, oh my God, no wonder these amyloid proteins are causing Alzheimer's. Except the problem with that is that in a lot of people, these proteins and plaques are a late player. They're a late development in the disease that happen long after the first step. And the first step is a decline in the brain's glucose usage. And something I forgot to mention earlier, but it works in here, is that this decline in the brain's metabolism is measurable in people as young as their 30s and 40s. Alzheimer's is not a disease that develops overnight, right? Nobody wakes up all of a sudden one day with severe dementia. This is something that starts in people's 30s and 40s, except when people are that young, they're healthy enough and still robust enough that the brain is compensating. But the brain can only compensate for so many years. Once you start eventually you reach a tipping point where the brain is not able to compensate anymore. And that's when you start showing signs and symptoms. That's when you start, forgetting things. That's when you start becoming disoriented. But by the time that happens, this disease process has been in place for years and sometimes decades. So the reduction in the brain's glucose metabolism happens decades before you actually show signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's. And the amyloid proteins happen later, much later. And I think they are kind of the brain, like to put it in a kind of a funny way or to humanize these amyloids. When you have a neuron or a brain cell that's already so damaged from a constant influx of glucose for so many years during your younger years of eating junk and bagels and soda and all this, stuff, when your brain is already so damaged and so overwhelmed with gunk and toxins from all those years of eating terribly, I think that the amyloid proteins are almost the brain's way of trying to save itself. Like, because we won't stop drinking our soda and drinking our orange juice and eating our Pop-Tarts and eating our sugary cereal, we leave the brain no choice but to protect itself. And it does it by secreting these proteins that are limiting the entry and the metabolism of glucose. It's almost like it's the brain's way of shutting off the glucose spigot. It's already so highly damaged that in order to protect itself from becoming more damaged, it's secreting amyloid to block the entry of yet more glucose.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it is exactly like the cholesterol thing. And some people talk about the analogy in cholesterol where you're blaming the firefighters for being at the fire and the scene of the crime. And it's not what's causing it. They're just there.
Exactly.
And it's for a different reason.
Exactly. And it's why statins, like I said before, they do reduce cholesterol, but they don't prevent heart attacks. It's the same thing with Alzheimer's. You have these drugs that reduce the amyloid. They do nothing to improve the Alzheimer's.
Yes. Okay, so to kind of recap, it sounds very similar to becoming insulin resistant. Is you have chronic insulin and your insulin receptors sort of wear out and they become more resistant, right? And so they become damaged. So it's the same thing in your brain where your brain cells lose the ability to use the glucose. So luckily, we have another fuel source, which is ketones. And people are probably aware of the ketogenic diet and low carb, high fat. It's another way that we can give energy to our body. So how does this relate to Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so if there's one sort of very promising and hopeful thing about Alzheimer's, it's that the fuel shortage and the energy crisis in the brain is specific to glucose. And like I said earlier, under normal circumstances, as somebody eating a typical type American style diet, glucose is the main fuel for the brain. But just because it's the main fuel the brain uses when it's available, because you're eating a lot of carbohydrate, which becomes glucose, doesn't mean it's the only fuel the brain can use. If there's not enough glucose to go around, your brain isn't going to die. Your brain is going to switch over to using something else. And the something else it switches over to using is ketones. We can produce ketones a number of ways, but the easiest, most reliable way to do it is with a low carb diet. Well, the easiest way to do it is, or most reliable, is fasting. But since we can't fast forever, at some point you have to eat food. Eating a very low carb diet forces your body to transition to running on some other fuel because there's not enough carbohydrate coming in. It's got to run on something else. It will switch over to using fat. And a byproduct of when your body is running mostly on fat are these other little fuel molecules called ketones. And almost all cells can use ketones. But when you eat a high-fat, very low-carb diet, most of the rest of the body will run on fat, and it will save the ketones for the brain because the brain really, really loves ketones.
Yeah, it's an amazing adaptation, and I don't see why we don't embrace it more, especially to do with Alzheimer's. So I believe there's studies about treating Alzheimer's with this type of diet.
There's some studies looking at both the diet and at what is called exogenous ketones, which is kind of like a ketone supplement. And so it's the kind of thing where even if you were still eating a normal high carb diet or you weren't on a ketogenic diet, you could still have some ketones in your body. And they've shown that when they take people with Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment, most of them do have noticeably improved cognition. Not everybody responds as well as other people. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that we probably don't have time to get into. But for most people, it's effective to some degree because it's so interesting that even though these brain cells have become unable to metabolize glucose, they are still able to use ketones. So it's actually really promising, because what that shows us is that these brain cells weren't dead. I actually used to say that these cells were like starving to death, but they didn't starve to death. They really sort of went into a hibernation mode, or like a power save mode, where they kind of turned off a few essential functions to stay alive while they didn't have enough energy. But as soon as they have enough energy, like from ketones, they come right back online. Because if these brain cells were actually dead, people would never get any better with ketones. They would never show any improved cognition. If those cells were completely gone and dead, there would be no improvement whatsoever in these people's behavior or their memory. But we do see improvements. So I think that's really promising. Yeah.
Yeah, that seems, it's unmistakably something is there.
Yeah. And I just think, kind of like I said earlier, we know for sure that the main problem in Alzheimer's is that these neurons have lost the ability to use glucose. We don't really know why, but the beautiful thing here is we don't need to know why in order to treat it from the back end, in order to give these people ketones, whether it's through these outside sources or from a ketogenic diet. And absolutely, yes, we still need to do that research to identify exactly what is causing the metabolic problem. But even without perfectly identifying it, we can still, I'm a nutritionist. I can't really use the word treat. We can intervene with a nutritional strategy that raises ketones, because frankly, it is the exact same thing with type 2 diabetes. After all these years, over a century, basically, of researching what type 2 diabetes is and how it happens, we still don't know. If you go on Twitter and you see the most brilliant PhDs and MDs, they still argue over what actually causes it. But that doesn't change the fact that a low-carb or ketogenic diet is an extremely, extremely effective intervention for that condition. We don't know for sure what causes type 2, yet here we have this intervention that completely reverses it. And I think we could probably do the same with Alzheimer's.
I agree. So how can we intervene now? What for preventative measures? Yeah, we can't say for sure that if you eat the correct diet and do these things that you won't get it, but what can we do to lower our chances?
So I think that the type of diet and lifestyle required to potentially prevent this, and I say potentially because we don't know for certain that we can prevent it, but I believe that we can. The type of diet and lifestyle that would potentially prevent this, I think, is very different, not very different, but less severe, less extreme than the one that I think would be needed to turn it around when someone is already dealing with it. So if it's almost like a diabetes of the brain or a glucose and insulin problem in the brain, then the same type of intervention that normalizes glucose and normalizes insulin levels in the rest of the body should also be pretty effective for the brain. And I think it would be. And that's basically a low-carb diet. And that doesn't mean that everybody needs to follow a very strict ketogenic diet for prevention. Strict ketogenic meaning very, very low carbohydrate. What is required, I think, is staying within your own individual level of carbohydrate tolerance, right? Some of us can only eat 40 or 50 grams of carbs a day. And if we go over that, our insulin is constantly high. We're riding up and down on the blood sugar roller coaster all day. Other people, especially if you're young, if you're very athletic, very muscular, you can get away with, and not even just get away with, but remain perfectly healthy with much, much more carbohydrate in your diet. So I think, a whole foods, lower carbohydrate diet, but, carbohydrate intake within your own individual sensitivity level. And of course, I would recommend getting most of those carbs from whole sources, whether that's going to be broccoli and carrots and asparagus, or even, the fruit, not fruit juice, not dried fruit leather roll-ups, regular real food. And of course, so many of the foods that we've been scared away from, eggs, including the yolks, butter, cheese, red meat, pork, chicken, and I get the question a lot, can you do a low-carb or ketogenic diet as a vegetarian? Yes, you can, especially if you consume eggs and dairy. It's really no problem. You'll do fine. It is much, much more difficult as a vegan. That's a whole separate topic. But regardless of what type of diet you eat, I think the key would be to keep your blood sugar and insulin in healthy levels and try to get most of your food from whole, unprocessed sources. And even that word unprocessed is loaded, because something like a sausage or a really good quality salami or prosciutto, people will say that that's processed because it's been tinkered with in some way. It's not like directly from the pig or the cow, but
it's a good kind of processed, a much better.
Yeah, like there's a difference between something like that and something like, I don't want to use any brand names, but some sugary cereal or some type of pastry that is like has electric blue frosting on it and has 800 million ingredients.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned all these foods that are great to eat, like bacon or pork, and people listening might still think that those are bad for them. And this cholesterol and whole lie. And so, yeah, cholesterol is good for your brain. It's necessary for every cell in your body. And we shouldn't be afraid of that. I mean, we talked about the vegan diet not being great. I mean, if you're trying to eat such a very low fat vegan diet, you're maybe running into more problems, right? You're depriving your body of this necessary cholesterol and omega-3 fatty acids and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, the body, your body will make cholesterol. Your body makes more cholesterol than you could ever eat, even if you were on a diet of like exclusively egg yolks and butter. But that being said, some people's bodies may not be able to produce as much cholesterol as they need. They may do better getting some from their diet. It's the same thing with, like you said, some of the omega-3s. The human body does have the capacity to convert the plant form of omega-3, like the one we find in flax and chia. We can convert that into the EPA and DHA that's really found in animal foods, but our capacity for it is very, very low. And so most people need to ingest it because their body isn't capable of making enough of it. Even though we can make it, we can't make enough of it. And even on an hard to say these words, even on an omnivorous diet, people who eat plants and animals and a mixture of all different kinds of foods still have what we call conditionally essential things. Like there are certain amino acids that the body can manufacture that we don't need to ingest. But again, if you're sick, if you're under stress, if you're in certain type of situation, your body might not be able to make all that it needs as quickly as it needs it. And we're so much better off getting it from food. And I will say, I don't support the vegan way of eating. I think there's a lot of potential pitfalls in it. However, if people are very, very wedded to it and they are absolutely not willing to change at all, the advice that I can give in terms of brain health and in terms of, trying to protect yourself over the long term, protect your cognitive function, even if you're a vegan, I would recommend trying to do a low carb, higher fat version of a vegan diet, because you can do a vegan diet where you eat a lot of coconut products that are very high in good fats. You can eat, olives, avocados, nuts. And, you can do a vegan diet without living on dates and figs and sugar and processed soybeans. I think you're going to struggle to get enough quality protein. You're going to struggle to get some of the critical vitamins, but if you insist on remaining a vegan, you can do, a better version, a high fat, low carb version of a vegan diet that's going to be better for you than living on fruit.
I agree completely. And back to what I was talking about, eating pork and bacon and fat. I mean, it's more than just cholesterol. I mean, I'm also talking about just running on fat in general instead of sugar, which we kind of danced around. But if anyone's new to this, your body can, run on glucose or it can run on fat, and it's just better to run on fat. So
yeah, I mean, you can do pretty well on a low carb diet or a low fat diet. So meaning a high fat diet or a high carb diet. What you can't do is both. That's the standard American diet, where it's pretty high in fat and pretty high in carb. So yeah, your body can run primarily. So it's not binary. It's not like on or off, like you're either running on fat or you're running on carbohydrate. The body's very complicated, has a lot of different processes going on at the same time. We're running on a bunch of different fuels at the same time, but one will predominate. And I do think it's better to run on fat. I think you can get away with running on carbs, but if you are specifically looking to maintain a healthy brain over the long term, I think you're better off getting more of your energy from fat and going lower on carbs.
Exactly. And just to put a button on that, if you're trying to run it exclusively on carbs, then you're having to avoid fat at all costs. I've heard, less than 10% fat. It's just maybe less palatable and harder to stick to than ketogenic diet. Some people say that's hard to stick to, which I don't agree with at all, or even not full ketogenic, but just, low carb, high fat. I feel like a lot more people would have a hard harder time being so low fat to do well with the high carbohydrate.
I agree. I think it's probably a personal choice. I think there are some people who probably do fine on the low, the very low fat, high carb. I couldn't do it. I was ravenous all the time. I just, eating low carb, I can go many, many hours without eating, and I'm not shaky. I'm not angry. I'm not irritable. I'm just fine. And I keep going. And the food is delicious. And
it's win-win. And that's kind of leads right into what I wanted to talk about is intermittent fasting. You talked about that's a way to produce ketones in your body. So I started doing that, and it's been amazing. And I don't eat till lunch, and I'm not even hungry till lunch. And I get a good 16-hour fast. And do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think fasting is kind of like the new craze. Everybody wants to fast. Everybody's into it. I don't think everybody needs to fast, but it also depends on how we define fasting. Like you said, intermittent fasting, some people define that as just a 12 and 12, where so you go at least 12 hours of the day without eating. So let's say you stop eating dinner one night at 7 p.m. You don't eat again until breakfast the next morning at 7 a.m. So you have a minimum of 12 hours with no eating. Some people extend that to 16 or 18 hours, so they wouldn't break their fast, quote unquote, have their first meal of the day until, 2 or 3 the next afternoon. And then have a dinner. They eat all their food in a 6 or 8 hour window. And the benefit, and again, not everybody has to do that, but the benefit of doing that is that the longer you go without eating, the more time you spend with your insulin low and your glucose low. And the more time you can spend with your insulin low, the more you tip your body toward the side of running on fat. And some people will produce higher ketones than others, but everybody will produce at least some amount of ketones at that point. That's really the point of fasting, is to balance the time we spend eating with time we don't spend eating. Because, some people will argue that even if somebody eats complete junk, like the modern American diet, that would be fine if they weren't eating as often. Like it used to be where you had breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that was it. There was no snacking. There was no like, oh, the kid's at the ball game, he needs a snack. And then he has soccer practice and he needs another snack. And he can't play for 1 hour without having a Gatorade. This didn't exist a long time ago. There was just 3 square meals, and your mom would yell at you if you had a snack because you would ruin your dinner. And I'm totally stealing this from Dr. Jason Fung, by the way. I'm going to give him credit for it. If people can look him up. He's very well known in the fasting community.
Yeah.
And nowadays, we're just eating from the minute we wake up till the minute we go to bed. We have 3 meals, and we have snacks, and we eat after the gym. And, you go to the electronics store and there's food, and you go to the office supply store and they sell candy. And it's like, we're buying and selling and eating food in places where 50 years ago you didn't buy, sell, and eat food. And so I just think it helps overall metabolic health to spend some time without eating. And for most people, it's very easy to do. It's much, much harder psychologically than it is physically, because we're just so accustomed to eating. We eat so, when you fast, you realize how often you eat out of boredom or recreation or distraction. It's amazing.
I absolutely agree. It just takes some getting used to. And then once you do it, then it's very easy. And then you realize, what was I doing this whole time? And I'll steal something too. I heard someone said most of the beneficial things happen to your body when you're not eating. That's when your body repairs itself. That's when it's not having to produce insulin to, knock down your blood sugar. We don't need 3 meals. We don't need 5 meals a day. It's going to help long term with your body not having to produce so much insulin.
Yeah, and some people will take it further and do like an extended fast. They'll fast for 48 hours, even 72 hours. That can be very therapeutic for certain conditions. Of course, if somebody's going to do that, please work with a doctor or someone who's qualified to help you do that, especially if you're on any kind of medication. You don't want to do that by yourself. But just to go 12 hours, that was normal. That used to be normal, like when you had dinner and that was it. Mom said the kitchen's closed, come back tomorrow morning for breakfast. So I think that's a good way to start, is the 12 and 12, or even like the 16-8, all that really is. And what that means is, 16 hours of not eating, and you eat usually 2 meals within an 8-hour window. All that really means is skipping 1 meal.
Yeah.
Maybe you skip breakfast, or maybe you skip dinner. Like, it's not, people make it out to be this huge, scary thing, and it's really not.
It's not hard at all. I thought it was too, just a few months ago. And then I realized that I wasn't hungry if I was fat adapted. And, used to running on fat, I got way less hungry between meals. And also I can eat more during my 2 big meals, which is something I do anyway. I love to just eat and eat and eat and eat. And then this allows me to do that. I can stuff my face and then I'm full and I focus on my work and I am fine. And then 8 hours later, I'm like, oh my God, I guess I should eat.
Yeah. And you get to chow down and enjoy what you love.
Yeah, it's so great. I just had the nicest steak that I sous vide today. Okay, so I guess there's just a few more things that we can talk about, long-term prevention strategies and ideas. Like I know sleep is big.
Yeah, so if we're talking specifically about Alzheimer's, definitely for long-term potential prevention, the diet is key. It is by far the most important thing. But there's a lot of other lifestyle things that affect the way we process carbohydrates and glucose and insulin, and sleep is a big one. You want to get good quality and quantity of sleep. I don't think everybody needs 8 hours of sleep. I think you sort of know if you're getting enough sleep or not. And it's not enough to even just be in the bed for a certain amount of time. If you're the type that wakes up 6 or 8 times a night, or you have sleep apnea, you have to try to get that corrected, because you do want some good quality sleep. And part of that is because sleep dramatically affects insulin sensitivity. I know it sounds weird, but they've done studies on this where you can sleep deprive people and they actually become insulin resistant the next day. Like it affects the way your body processes food even the next day. And another big thing specifically for Alzheimer's is these amyloid proteins that we talked about, how they have to be cleared away properly so they don't build up and cause problems. This happens more effectively when we sleep. It happens all the time, but it's upregulated when we sleep. So you definitely want to give your brain some time to sort of take out the trash overnight.
Yeah, that's one of the only things I did hear about before I got really into all this stuff, is that sleeping is your brain's time to clear out the junk. I'm a huge fan of sleeping. Yeah.
I think we all are. It's the one thing we all love to do, and most of us just don't do it enough. Like you would think, like for me, I'm not going to lie, I'm a huge night owl. I stay up way too late, and you would think I would just go to bed as soon as I could. Who doesn't want to go to sleep? And yet I'll find any excuse not to go to sleep. I'll watch stuff on Netflix I've already watched. I'll read stupid blog posts that aren't even teaching me anything,
It is a weird sort of impulse, but I think everyone just needs to focus on it a little more. And it's hard for some people with their job and all that, but I guess just make it a priority. Yeah, everything, even what is it, like impulse control or hunger is controlled by sleep. There's studies on that too. If you don't get enough sleep, you're gonna reach for that donut more than you would have if you got a full night. So yeah, that's big. And then exercise. Talk about BDNF. Yeah, of course. I remember that from your lecture.
Yeah, it's such a cliche to say, oh, diet and exercise, but it's a cliche because it's true. Exercise, I think probably the biggest benefit of exercise in terms of brain health is that it is so good for metabolic health, for insulin sensitivity, for glucose regulation. Exercise is really, really very beneficial for that. But there is this thing, like you said, something called BDNF. It stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And there's a doctor, I think his name was Ronald Hoffman, who said BDNF is like Miracle Grow for your neurons. And I told him I was going to steal that line. So, but at least I give him credit for it. Yeah, exercise stimulates this protein called BDNF, which basically it's hard to explain what it does. It just keeps the neurons healthy. I don't know if it helps grow new ones, but I guess it increases neuroplasticity, like the formation of new synapses. So the way that neurons talk to each other is that they pass chemical messages between each other, and they don't actually touch. There's a teeny tiny space through which these messages get passed, and that space is called a synapse. And I think that BDNF helps form new synapses.
Okay, and so one of the best ways to produce those is exercise. And
I think so. I have to check, as that may not be the mechanism of BDNF. I'm like having a brain fart and I'm not realizing, but yeah, and synapses will be newly formed. I mean, you make these new pathways and stuff by doing new things, by exercising.
Yeah, there's many ways to do it, but there's many benefits to exercise. Yeah, and like you said, everyone prescribes diet and exercise, but everyone kind of prescribes the wrong diet and exercise. They say eat less and exercise more, and you can over-exercise and you're just going to get hungrier, and you can eat less and then you're just going to be chronically hungry, and that doesn't do anyone any favors, and you're just going to eventually gain your weight back or be miserable or any number of things. So eating a low carb, high fat diet. It's the easiest way to feel full.
Yeah. And you want to, the whole move more thing, eat less, move more. I don't agree with the eat less part. I agree with eat better and move more or move differently. Move more is not just about going to the gym and getting on the treadmill or lifting weights. It's about walking more. Like, again, total cliche, but if you're at a shopping mall, park at the furthest spot. Don't spend 15 minutes looking for the closest parking spot. Park further away and walk half a mile to the mall. I used to work in the Pentagon, believe it or not. That's a big building. I mean, I would have to walk about a quarter of a mile just from the front door of the building to where my office was. So it's just incorporating more movement into your life. If you're in a neighborhood where it's safe to do so, walk to the library instead of driving, walk to the grocery store, and then you'll have to carry your bags back too. And if you can't carry 30 pounds of groceries, well, guess what? That means you have to walk there more often. That's great. Not everyone, is in a neighborhood where it's safe to do that. So just, use your own discretion. But because you said something important. You said it's possible to exercise too much, and it is. And the truth is most people could use more exercise. Most people are probably not active enough, but I am a private nutritionist. I do see clients, and especially in young women. It happens sometimes in young men too, but young women tend to exercise way too much, especially in light of how little they eat. So if you're going to exercise a lot, you need to eat well and you need to rest well. Like I tell people, if you're going to work out hard, you have to rest hard. So you have to have a healthy balance, like with exercise, with food, with anything. Just because some is good doesn't mean more is better.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't mean to discourage people from exercising. I was kind of talking about two things.
No, I know. I didn't mean you weren't saying that.
I just want to be clear is the two things would be like people trying to do marathons every month puts a lot of stress on your body and it's probably too much. And people who think they can outrun a bad diet. I mean, the whole weight loss is mainly about diet, and mainstream media and seems to think that it's all about exercising.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so there's one thing we skipped. I wanted to talk about detecting Alzheimer's early. You were talking about some of these symptoms we can't see start in 30s and 40s, and doctors aren't checking for this. And it's a lot about they're checking for glucose and they're not looking at insulin. So they're talk about that, please.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When we say this whole type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain and how the brain is not using glucose properly, you might get the impression that it's all about glucose. But, we did mention insulin. When you go to the doctor, they only ever check your glucose. If you go for a checkup, they test your fasting blood sugar. Sometimes they'll do your hemoglobin A1C, which is sort of a longer term average of your blood sugar, but they're both measures of blood glucose. They tell you nothing about insulin. And the crazy thing about insulin, and the reason I think people at risk for Alzheimer's are being missed in much younger years when this thing could be caught early, is that no one's ever looking for insulin. And there's millions of people, without exaggeration, millions of people who have a perfectly normal fasting glucose and a perfectly normal A1C, because the reason those things are normal is that they're being kept in check by very, very high insulin. And the insulin alone, independent of the glucose, is a driver of many, many chronic disease issues of our time. Alzheimer's is one, gout, hypertension, PCOS, BPH, the benign prostate hypertrophy, the prostate gland enlargement, erectile dysfunction. All of this stuff is driven by high insulin, even if your glucose is normal. So in terms of detection, you can have a PET scan to actually measure your brain's uptake of glucose. But, it's kind of an invasive test. It's very expensive, and it's really not something the average doctor is going to order. It's not something the average person needs to have done. What you could do is just get a fasting insulin test. That's going to tell you right away if your insulin is elevated. In some people, the fasting level will be normal, but you still have a lot of signs and symptoms of chronically high insulin. So what that means is, like, first thing in the morning, after it's been several hours overnight that you haven't eaten and you get your insulin tested, it's kind of low. But as soon as you eat something, you have a nice breakfast, your insulin shoots up to the moon and it stays there the whole day. It kind of stays elevated. If your fasting level is high, you know something's wrong. If it's not high, you can look for other signs and symptoms
of chronically high insulin. And a big giveaway to that is high triglycerides and low HDL. If you have the combination of those two things, that's a pretty good sign that you have high insulin. Another one, like I said, if you have high blood pressure, in most people, high blood pressure has nothing to do with the amount of salt or sodium that you eat. It has everything to do with high insulin. If you have abdominal obesity, so they used to call it a beer belly. Like if you see someone that has kind of thinner arms and legs, but they look like they've got a beach ball in their tummy, that abdominal obesity is usually just high insulin.
Yeah. Yes. And actually, yeah, I would like to talk about this, a personal story. So earlier we were talking about doctors and mainstream sort of medical practitioners not understanding this as a disease of chronic insulin or hyperinsulinemia. And this kind of hits home for me is my mom actually is in stage 4 Alzheimer's, like the very, very end. You know, we're trying to just do whatever we can to help her at the ending stages. And I asked the caretaker and my brother to talk about not giving her carbs. Like, we're still feeding her high carbs. I mean, it's too late anyway. And the doctor laughed them out of the room when they said they suggested a low carb, high fat diet. They brought it up again and she actually like snapped at them and made a joke. You're insane.
Wow.
So it was just very weird to me that the primary care Alzheimer's specialist doctor just laughed them out of the room when they even mentioned this.
Isn't that horrible?
Yeah.
That breaks my heart. It's unconscionable. I mean, and I'm sure that physician means well. She's not ill-intended, but she just doesn't have the information. Again, like this is why I wrote my book, because this information is everywhere. Why is nobody talking about it?
Well, I don't know what to say. Yeah, it's our whole economy and pharmaceutical companies and culture is just set up around carbs. So it just seems so hard for people to think of it any differently or the way that we've been taught for the past 50 years.
Yeah. I mean, people have asked me actually on previous interviews, you know, why doctors are so not closed-minded, but why don't they think that diet matters? Why don't they think, you know, why do they laugh you out of the room when you talk about a diet for Alzheimer's? And I don't believe it's because they are ill-intentioned or because they wish their patients to do badly. I think they honestly just don't know. I think they've just never heard of this. Now, why they've never heard of this, I don't know. Maybe they don't have time to read the journals. Maybe they don't have time to keep up with the latest research. But to me, I'm going to use a term from my time in the military. That's dereliction of duty. That's being, you know, being derelict in your duty to learn about the latest developments in your field and the new things that are actually helping people. So, you know, could you even take 1 hour a day and read a paper from a journal? You know, I'm not a physician. I don't know what it's like. I know they have very limited time, but if I found this as a student, then I refuse to believe that the professionals don't know it exists. I mean, why did I have to write this book? The Alzheimer's Association in the US should be beating this drum the loudest. They should be the ones saying, listen, we don't know why the brain has lost the ability to use glucose, but we do know that it has lost the ability, and that's the major, you know, problem in the Alzheimer's brain. What are we going to do about it? They don't, like, I'm not afraid to say that I don't have all the answers, but let's focus on what we do know and work from there. And the Alzheimer's Association is not even doing that. You've never heard anything about this from them ever. I
cannot believe this. Maybe I should try to contact their PR people or something. I'm going to get mad just even think about it.
I can't believe that they haven't heard of it. I can't believe that the leading organization for this illness is unaware that that's the problem in the brain, reduced glucose metabolism. Again, if I could find it as a 20-something-year-old grad student, you're going to tell me their PhD neurologists and MDs are unaware? Maybe they are, but I just find it hard to believe.
Yeah, well, purposely ignoring, there must be something going on where it just goes against, I think it's hard for people to go against everything that they've learned their whole career, and no one wants to admit they're wrong, and everyone's sort of resistant to change. It's got to be something about that, or bigger money influences or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to Alzheimer's, I also think it's, to the doctor's credit, I think it is probably very, very difficult to even entertain the possibility that you could make a dent in it with a diet. But they don't know. Like, if they knew what I know about the food, you know, they are medical professionals, so they specialize in the medicine, they specialize in the drugs. I'm a nutritionist. I specialize in the food and the nutrition. they're simply not aware. So I think that's probably part of it too. They just, like Alzheimer's is so complicated and so scary, right? How could it possibly have anything to do with the food that you put into your body all day long, every day?
Yeah, except the people eating, the traditional diet that their ancestors did don't have Alzheimer's.
Exactly. This is not, or it may have been very, very rare, just like diabetes was, just like cancer was, just like heart disease was, extremely rare. And it's exploded in incidence over the last few decades the same way those other conditions have.
Well, okay, before I get angry, I guess we can sort of recap here and bring it home. But so basically, to an average person, there's no reason not to start now by, just eating less carbohydrates. You don't have to, or refined carbohydrates specifically, and sugar. You don't have to get crazy and measure ketones. And what do you say about that?
Yeah, I think, to somebody that just wants to get started, keep it simple. You don't need to make yourself completely crazy, weighing and measuring your food and tracking everything with 6 different apps and making it into a calculus assignment. The most important thing is to get rid of the vast majority of sugar and starch from your diet. And you may, like I said earlier, have a better tolerance for things like beans and lentils and fruit and, parsnips and starchier root vegetables, but some of us may have to even go without most of that and focus on good quality meats, seafood, poultry, non-starchy vegetables, dairy products if you're okay with dairy. That's the first step. Over time you can kind of educate yourself more as to little changes you might want to make, but by far the most important step is to, stop the sugar and starch. And it sounds easy and it mostly is, but you also have to reframe what you think of as a health food. You might be thinking of certain granola bars or fiber bars or things like that, and you look on the label and it's really nothing but sugar. Even if it says it's high protein on the label, it may have 6 or 8 grams of protein, but it's got 28 grams of sugar.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
Yeah. So, people just spend a little more time in the grocery store and read labels is probably the best advice I can give.
Yeah, or just avoid anything with labels. But
that helps too. But some people are not ready to quite make that leap. But that would be the best place.
Yeah, I kind of realize people aren't ready for that. So I guess my advice is, and this is what I had a long conversation with my brother. He's like, yeah, but I love this. He lives in Hawaii still, where we grew up, and he's like, oh, you got your rice, you got this. It's just normal part of life. And my sort of closing message to him is, once you know the stakes, like once you really understand what Alzheimer's really is, and it runs in our family, and once you understand even cancer as a metabolic disease, which is a whole nother thing with some, Dr. Seyfried and Dom D'Agostino and some of these guys are looking into, for some reason no one acknowledges. And it seems like, wacky science, even though it makes perfect sense. Once you know how high these stakes are for long term, it's not just about short term, oh, I'm going to lose 10 pounds and like look good at the beach. Then maybe it is hard to stick to, and you still eat the rice. You're like, yeah, whatever. I'll just like work out more, which also won't help. But I think the message is, it's a lot bigger picture. There's your whole life ahead of you, and it is all affected by what you eat daily.
It is. And I don't think people realize just how much influence your diet has. And it is so much easier to stay healthy than it is to lose your health and try to get it back.
Absolutely. So I'm very glad you came on the podcast. I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did too. Yes. And Amy, her book is called The Alzheimer's Antidote. I have it right here. I just came in yesterday, so I didn't get a chance to read it. But I am, and I'm going to give it to my brother next. What else? We can find you at a website, Twitter.
Yeah, my website is tuitnutrition.com. That's TUIT nutrition.com. And I'm on Twitter at tuitnutrition.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, everyone check her out and start eating well.
All right, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Okay, bye.
Take care.
And that's a wrap, folks. Thanks for supporting the film on Indiegogo. Subscribe to the Food Lies YouTube channel. We have videos coming out weekly. Thanks for interacting and sharing your stories with me on social media. I try to post daily, so check me out at foodlies.org on Twitter and food.lies on Instagram. Catch you next time.